Welcome to Blender 2.8. If this is your first time using Blender, you'll see a dialog box asking you whether you want to use Blender shortcuts, whether you want to select with right or left, etc. Just hit next. The defaults will be fine. So before we get into the meat of the tutorial, I want to just go over the basics of the Blender interface. At the top left, you have the standard menu bar. If you go to File, Save As, this is the most important thing we will do today. So just name your file, save it, and do that a lot. Just Control S will save. You can see saved down here. Control S, Control S. Beside that, you will see all of these preset layouts or different workspaces. We'll mostly just probably stay in layout and modeling for this tutorial. But each of these different workspaces is just made up of the same components, although maybe arranged differently for a specific purpose. So the next component that we'll look at is the hierarchy. This is where you can see all of the objects in your scene. You can see they're highlighting here in the viewport as I select them. You can arrange them in collections, which are essentially Blender's folder system. Below that, you have the properties panel. We'll spend a lot of time in here, and so we'll get to know this a lot better as we go. But essentially, this is where any information that's not spatial data is going to be stored. At the bottom, you have the timeline. Central and large is our viewport, which is where we'll spend most of our time. So to briefly go over how to navigate the viewport, you have the axes up here. If you click in any of the blank space and drag, you can orbit. If you want to pan to look centrally at something else, you can move the view by clicking and dragging this button. You can zoom in using the magnifying glass. If you get lost, you can reset your view by hitting View Frame Selected or View Frame All. All of the view navigation controls up here can also be done using the middle mouse button. So if you hold the middle mouse button and drag, you can rotate your screen. If you hold Shift middle mouse button, you can pan. And if you scroll the middle mouse button, you can zoom in and out. To manipulate objects in the viewport, you have these tools on the side. You have the move tool, the rotate tool, the scale tool, and everything at once, which gets a little hectic. So I prefer to keep one at a time. You can move along any of the axes by selecting them. If you don't want to move in a specific direction, you can just grab the object itself, although I recommend staying in specific directions to be precise. You can move along two axes by selecting one of these planes. And the same goes for scaling. So you can scale in a direction, scale along a plane, scale just by selecting the whole, and that'll scale proportionally. So this is scaling non-proportionally, scaling proportionally. Rotation. You can rotate along any axis, and they're all colored along with the matching axis on the viewport. So again, that works for any of these, although it's not really as visible in the light source. But then to select, you have several options. You have standard selection, which is just it clicks whatever you click on. You have box select, which can select more than one thing at a time. You have the 3D cursor mover, which we're not going to really spend very much time using. You can just leave that in the center. Any of the movement tools also have shortcuts. So you have G for move. So it's really G for grab. But if you hit G and then click on X, Y, or Z, you can constrain it to an axis. That also goes for R for rotation. So R, Z, X, Y. And Scaling is S, Z, X, Y. And that pretty much covers the Blender interface and basic viewport navigation. In this part, we're going to be focusing on creating the balloon and the bucket that we're going to be using in our scene. So first, we're not going to need the camera or the light or any of these. So just go to your box select tool, select them all, and hit X to delete them. Also, the 3D cursor that I moved in this last section, I'm going to snap that back to center by hitting Shift S and cursor to world origin. So to get started, just center up on the screen, and let's add a UV sphere. So we have the UV sphere, and we want to manipulate this to look like the balloon. First, I should introduce you to object mode versus edit mode. So object mode is for moving around objects as wholes, and edit mode is used for moving individual pieces. There's a couple ways to switch between them. You can just select from the menu, either edit or object mode, or you can hit tab to switch, or you can go and change workspaces. So this will set up your workspace differently so that it's more fitting for editing this way. And so that's what I'll be doing a mix throughout. If we're gonna try and flatten out the top of this to kind of create the top of the balloon, doing it vertex by vertex is a terrible idea. So I want to start by getting the side by clicking the side of this axis icon. This can also be done by hitting 1 or 3 on your numpad. That'll take you to different sides. That's like front and side view. 7 will take you to top view. Just using that axis is probably the easiest thing. Once you have that selected and you're ready to start editing, turn on proportional editing by clicking this button. And what that's going to do is pull the things around the selected object so that it responds. It's a little bit more like using clay than like, I don't have no idea what that is similar to. It's like just craziness and looks really bad. But it can be good for like hard surface modeling and whatnot. But that's not what we're doing right now. So select your proportional editing tool, go to the move tool, and move down just a little bit, and I'm gonna scale up. See this circle here? That's my radius of influence. I wanna move that up until probably like there. And then once that's there, I wanna select this center section here, and I wanna move that just a little bit up and shrink down. But there's an issue. It didn't move the back section. So to make sure that you have the back section selected, get back to the front view and go to wireframe. So now we can see all sides and we can select anything we want. We have so much power, it's incredible. So select that center section and just move it up ever so slightly. Whoa. We didn't deselect that. To deselect, hit A to select all, and then A again. So it's AA, quickly. So, grabbing on the Z. And voila. Now we want to pull out this bottom part so that it kind of creates a cone shape. Just like that. Perfect. Once we have the shape that we like, we can delete the bottom vertex by hitting X. And then we can switch back to our layout panel to see how that looks. So we've made the balloon. Let's move that up and make room for the basket. So we'll add the basket, mesh, cube, scale that down. And then we want the bottom to be smaller than the top. So I'm going to hit tab this time to switch into edit mode instead of going to the modeling panel. Either one works. So we'll kind of move down so that we can see. And I'm going to use plane selection. So we have point, line, and plane. Plane selects like that. Line selects like that. Point like what we used originally. But by selecting the bottom plane, I can scale it. First, I should turn off proportional editing. This is an example of when you wouldn't want to use it, because there's not so many vertices in general, and we do want it to look square-shaped. So we've kind of shrunk in the bottom. Then we want to select the top, and we're going to start using these tools on the side here. These are your modeling tools. If you didn't use them, you would be stuck with whatever geometry you started with. Like everything's going to just be some kind of a square, but twisted. This lets us do more things. So by insetting, we can take that top face and put a face inside that face. And that's going to be helpful so that we can grab this yellow bar, drag that down until we see it start to come through there. I'm going to go back to wireframe mode so I can see what's going on. Oh my word. My view's skipping. Sometimes when you go outside of off the screen, it'll skip down a little bit. Again, you can always just hit view, frame selected to center your view on what you want to be looking at. So once you've got that selected, scale, and just scale that in. And then hit tab to get out of that, and I'll switch back to solid shading mode, and that looks like the beginning of a hot air balloon. We will now focus on editing with modifiers. So modifiers are a tool that Blender has to make editing easier and faster and somewhat automated. So the first thing I want to do is with the bucket, I'd like the edges to be rounded. We could do this manually in editing, but it'll be a lot faster if we don't. So I'm going to start by going in and adding a bevel. So when I add a bevel, this looks a bit big. I can make that smaller by changing the width to something around there. And then I'll increase the segments to 5. So I find that gives a good rounded look. And part of the reason for this is just that whenever you start rendering things out, you want edges to catch light. It looks more natural that way. Same with this. Like right now, this is infinitely thin. We'll want to give this some thickness there so that something can be there to catch the light. But first, before we do that, I want to add a subdivision surface modifier. And that's just going to kind of round that out a little bit. We're also going to push the viewport to be the same as the render. They're separate so that like in the viewport it could be a lower resolution than the render, but we really just want them to be the same for now. And the other thing we want to do is we want to actually start creating the little like balloon sections, because it would look a little strange if we just left it as one giant balloon shape, because that's not what hot air balloons look like. So if we look at it from above, and I'm hitting 7, numpad 7, to get to the top view. If I hit tab to enter into edit mode and select line, I can go around here and I'm going to select the north, south, east, west. Actually, it doesn't even matter if I select. Yeah, let's just go a little further out. What? I'm gonna switch off scaling too. That way it's not in the way. So selected those two, selected these two, and then also the 45s. So I guess northeast, southeast, whatever. I've done enough reciting of directions. So once you have those selected, we want to select the edges the whole way down, but I don't want to do it by hand. So if I just go to select loops and then edge loops, that'll select the entire edge. So when I'm scaling this in, I don't want to just select and pull. It's going to do weird things to the top. So I'm going to select this blue plane so it doesn't scale along the z-axis. And just pull it in about there. And you'll notice I made a mistake here. So let's undo that. So I'm going to quickly run through that again. Hit A. So we just want tops. And there should be 3 between each. There we go. So then select loops, edge loops, and then we'll scale inward like that. So again, not scaling along the z-axis, only the x and the y. There's an issue with this though. If we tab out of edit mode, you'll see that the inner part of that balloon is not sharp. And part of that is the way that the subdivision surface modifier, the way it interpolates. And in order to basically fool it into making sharp corners, we can add edge loops. So edge loops is this tool here on the side. And once you see that the yellow line is where you want it, you will click and drag it in. Or click and hold. So you'll click, hold, drag. And so you can see if my mouse is over the vertical line, it makes a horizontal cut. If it's over the horizontal line, it makes a vertical cut. So that's how you control it. At first, I was a bit confused as well when I started. So just go around until you can see that you've pulled in all of these sharp edges. You'll know because this gray thing that's kind of piercing through the mesh cage will not be piercing through anymore. So like I don't need to do that here because I already did it. I have now have a much more believable hot air balloon. Now that we've created these, it's really important that you stay organized. So I'm going to name them. We'll name this basket. And we'll name this balloon. Balloon has 2 L's. There we go. So now we wanted to do that, add some thickness here. There's a really easy way to do this using the solidify modifier. So that's add modifier, generate, solidify. And just like that, we've added a nice little edge. I'd say we can probably reduce the thickness to like 0.05. And that, whew, not what I meant. 0.02. Yeah, that looks fine. Just a tiny lip. So we have pretty much finished the modeling of the hot air balloon. So the next stage is to work on kind of modeling out the ocean. Luckily for us, Blender has a really good tool for that. I'm going to select all of this and, well, actually, I'm going to undo that because I want the ocean to be exactly flat on that plane. So I want to Shift A, Mesh Plane. There we go. So this plane is going to be our ocean. We're going to go to Modifier, Simulate, Ocean. And just like that, we have the beginning stages of ocean. I'd like to increase the size to 2, or by spatial size to 100. So double the size. And then choppiness to 4, and then scale. Well, we'll be able to see better once our resolution is up. Our resolution should be at 12. So that gives us a pretty decent ocean to get started with. Yeah, we're getting a little bit of piercing here, so you can just nudge the scale down until that stops. And I think to me that looks pretty good. I could see maybe scaling in a tiny bit, kind of match that to the size of our. so that the wave size looks appropriate considering the size of the hot air balloon. All right. So I think we've pretty much finished with our modeling stage. So we will move on to adding color or adding materials. Our next step in this project is to start creating and applying materials. So that's what's going to take this from looking gray and blah to something that's actually kind of cool. Before we start that, we're going to move from solid shading to look development, because that's what we're working on right now. We're working on developing the look. So this look development mode has like a preset lighting that will work with making materials and render quickly, and yeah, it's going to be really helpful for this next step. So the first thing we want to do is look at this balloon. The first issue with the balloon is that it's still really blocky. This is actually a really easy fix. If you go to Object and then go to Shade Smooth, sorry, make sure it's selected. You have to select it to affect it. That's the mantra that they teach you in art school. Art school. So there is an issue down here at the bottom where like the shading is doing some weird stuff. Really easy fix. If you just go to Object Data, Normals, hit Auto Smooth, any angle that's greater than like 30 degrees will, wait. Greater than 30 degrees will shade smooth. Something like that. Anyway, yeah, if you make it up to like 90 some degrees, it'll come back. So just keep it at 30, everything will be fine. And don't worry too much about how things work. It just works, and be happy that it works. So, well, I mean, it's fun to know how things work. I don't want to say that. That's just mean. Anyway, let's create a material so that we can have a nice red balloon. I like red balloons. Base color. Make mine red. You can make yours whatever color you want. It's your balloon. Make it a cool color. Just don't pick a lame color. That's the only requirement. So once you have the color for that, if you hit preview, you'll get like a rendered preview of what that's going to look like. It's just a little too shiny for my balloon. Like, balloons aren't really that shiny. There's a lot of information down here. This is when we employ our amazing skill to ignore information that we don't need. The only information we need right now is roughness. We're going to use metallic later. We're going to use color, metallic, and roughness. And that's it. We're not going to touch like anything else in here. I usually go around, I like to think 8 is like a good balloon roughness. I have opinions about balloon roughness, and the world will know them. They do now. To contrast that, I'm going to add another material for the basket, and I'm gonna go with like a brown. So like a nice, not too rich. Like the other ones are really rich colors, so to kind of contrast that, you kind of want to go with something not quite as saturated. And also we want to contrast the diffuse look we got here that's like not shiny at all. So I'm going to kind of bring in a tiny bit of metallic just to make it a little bit shiny in that way and reduce the roughness. And you can see we're starting to get a little bit of specular there, and that's more what we want on the basket, just so that, you know, it's a little different. It'll pick up a little bit more on the edges with that shininess there. Overall, a good time. But what if we wanted like a pattern on our balloon, right? Like, this is not a pattern. This is not cool. We want it to be cool. Well, we can duplicate the balloon that we've made by hitting Shift D and then hit Y to constrain it to the Y axis. And now we can select the balloon, add another material, and I'm going to select the red temporarily because we need to fill it with something. But I want this material just blue, but if I change the blue, like everything changes to blue, and we don't want that. So we want a version of this that keeps all the settings we made down here because we like the roughness and so we just need to make a copy of it. So this says how many are currently using, or how many objects, or how many times this material is currently in use. It's being in use 3 times, twice on this object and once on this object. But if you click it, it'll make a single user copy, which basically means it'll copy it. So that's what I did. So now if I change it, it makes this thing blue, and it doesn't affect the other thing, which is what I want. Actually, I don't want it to be blue. I want it to be white. Why would I make it blue? Let's just do 0.8. 0.8. I don't want it to be like blaringly white, just like white enough. What on earth? Oh, this is HSV, not RGB. Sorry. 0.8. 0.8. 0.8. Boom. So we have white. But how do we get it to show up? Real simple. Tab into edit mode, and then go to wireframe mode so that you can select through. And I want to be in the front view, so I hit 3 to get to this view, or 1 is technically front view, so it's side view. This is the side view. I'm going to box select, so I can go here, select box, and this one. Box select that, hit assign, and now if I go back to look development mode, you can see, I'm tabbing out of edit mode, that it works quite nicely to make a nice pattern. I'd like to give you guys some creative freedom here, so I'd like you to make one more balloon pattern, and then I will show you how to make balloons that have the same pattern but different colors so that you have a bunch of different types of balloons. All right, I'm jumping back in. Sorry. One more thing. Something that's going to make this easier. Notice that when I select this and make it white, it's not right beneath the cage. It's kind of like offset. I find it easier if it's directly on. So this button here, so we're in the modifiers, we're on our subdivision modifier. You can see subdivision. And I hit this, it basically just sends the mesh cage to it. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to pull out these edges, which were hidden before, but like if I go here and make this white, it's going to not go to the edge. So, and that just has to do again with just the interpolation of the subdivision surface modifier. So that is super helpful. Another super helpful tip is if you're trying to select a lot of things at once, if you hit Control, it'll select the whole path. So that can save you a lot of time. Alright, I'm pretty happy with the way these look. So now I'll show you how to duplicate them and change their colors. So to start, I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to hit Shift D and then hit Z to constrain it to the Z axis. And then I'm going to do it again. And one more time. I'll select this one here, and I will hit the 12, so it'll become an independent pair. And I'm going to start naming these. So this will be blue balloon. Actually, I'm going to name this one as well. White balloon. Balloon has 2 L's. Important to spell things right, especially if you're going to be posting them on the internet. Which one of these was the balloon? Is this the balloon? roughness 8, roughness 4. This is not the balloon. This is just material 1. That's like the default material. Anyway, this is the balloon. White balloon. Basket. Red balloon. Alright, so we're going to make this blue, because I named it blue balloon, and if I didn't name it blue, that would be wrong. We don't like being wrong. So I like a nice dark blue there. Then I can just go through these other ones. I can select the red and replace it with blue. So I'll do the same thing up here. I'll take this red. I'll hit the 9. I will name it yellow. And I'm really going to go for like an orange yellow, because I find that this, like a normal yellow, tends to just be a little too much. But right around there tends to be just right. So we'll take that. Put the yellow, whoa. Leave the white, well, I mean, I don't know what your patterns are, but that yellow did not look good there. I can tell you that. Don't forget to hit that button, and then I'll go again at like a nice dark green. That looks nice, I like that. Going across, and just switching it out as I go. What? No Christmas balloons. I do not want a red-green balloon. It doesn't look good. It's too much. Too much. These look nice. I like these. So now we want to get our ocean to have a decent material. So let's create a new material, name it ocean. And we'll try it on this to see how it looks. I want like a blue-green, dark blue-green. Want that roughness to be real low, like there. And let's increase the metallic to like there. That looks like pretty good ocean to me for now. So then now what we're going to do is create the prop for our backdrop. So I'm just going to be creating a plane. We will rotate it to exactly 90 degrees. So you can hit R, Y, 90. And that'll rotate it on the y-axis to 90. Then scale it up nice and big. And push it back. And we're going to give it its own material too, and we'll name it background, BG. For this, we are going to need to enter the material editor. So I'm going to open another window by dragging out from this corner. There we go. And then I'm just going to switch the editor type to shader editor. So I basically just want to add a gradient. Unfortunately, they call gradients color ramps. So, sorry, if you didn't see what I'm doing, I'm hitting Shift-A, search, color ramp. I don't know why they need to call it color ramp, and I don't like having that there. If this is in the way, hit N, just the letter N, and it'll disappear. Where did my color ramp go? There we are. So, if we connect that in, unfortunately, it doesn't put a gradient on it. It just chooses the middle color. If we want to actually put the gradient on it, we have to use some trickery. So first things first, if we're going to put any type of image, and I guess it would consider this an image of sorts, onto the face of an object, you need to UV unwrap it, which becomes a complicated process for this little guy here. But because it's just a plane and ours is so simple, we'll just hit tab in edit mode, make sure everything is selected, and then hit UV, Smart UV Project. And it's going to do our work for us. So in this area, we're going to now tell it that we want it to map the gradient onto the surface. So if you hit Shift A, search for UV map. I'm sorry I used search instead of searching through all of these, but it really is faster, and it's, yeah. If you want to go searching for things, I'm sure you can find it. There's the UV map, but I just find it easier to just type it out. So let's make some space, and we want to click in this box here, UV map. We want to tell the mapping to use the UV map that we generated for it, and then we want to tell the color ramp to put itself on the mapping we created. It's going to put the gradient on there at a 45-degree angle. If you just type in -45, it'll flatten that out. So now it's about in the middle. Kind of bring this in to tighten up the gradient. And I'm just going to go in here and make the white like a little bit blue, and then this will be like a kind of like a tangerine, like an orange, like that. And we'll mess more with it later, but for now you can close this window out just by clicking and holding up here and then dragging, and that'll put this little arrow in there, and then you can release and it's gone. Before we start making the particle system for the hot air balloons, we have some preparing to do. As is, these hot air balloons will do some weird things when you put them into a particle system. First, the balloon and the bucket aren't actually together, and so they'll kind of just disperse. And the other thing is, before we can even connect them, we have to actually apply the modifiers. But before we apply the modifiers, I want to have a backup, because it's always good to back up your work, especially if it took you a long time. So in order to back up our work, I'm going to make a copy of these. So Shift D, X, and then I'm going to hit M to make a new collection. So M, new collection. I'm going to name this backup. Cool. So we now have this collection here. I'm going to collapse it and make it invisible. This way it's out of our way. But if we went rendered right now, you would still see it. So for some reason they hide this, but you want to also make it not visible as well. I also usually keep this toggle out. This decides whether or not it's able to be clicked or selected. Just if something's in the way of trying to select something and you keep trying to select it and missing, it just helps you can turn off the thing you don't want to select. So I just like to keep those three icons on the side. So we have the backup, but now we also want a collection with just these, and that's going to be for our particles. So if we hit M, new collection, particles, then we're good to go. The next step before we start making the particle field is to merge them together so that they're each an individual balloon instead of two pieces making each balloon. So we're going to go to the Modifiers tab and start applying all of the modifiers onto each object. I recommend avoiding applying modifiers if you can, but in some cases you'll need to. It's just better for, it's like a non-destructive workflow. All right, looks good. 2, merge two objects. Select one, select the other. If you were to like box select this and try and join these by hitting Control J, it wouldn't work because one of them has to actually be active. So Unfortunately, box selecting won't work for all of them because the active one was over here when I box selected these. See, this yellow dot says which object is active. It has to merge with an active object. So just by hand, select. I would recommend selecting the balloon second. That way it merges as the balloon and doesn't call it basket, because that would be weird, but it really doesn't matter in the long run. So Control J, that's going to join the objects when they are all have the modifiers applied.
Control J, Control J, Control J, Control J, Control J, Control J.
Only slightly tedious. Shouldn't take you very long. Alright, they're all together and they are in our particles collection. So we are ready to set up our scene and put the particles in. So I'm gonna start out, before I build out the box to or the particle field, I wanna actually have the ocean done. Right now, this is too small. So we're gonna make this a lot bigger. And I'm gonna move these out of the way and we're gonna set up a camera so that we know how big everything needs to be. So we'll set that back. We will hit Shift A to add a camera. If I hit 0, that'll put me in there, and then it's Shift N, and then it's just WASD camera fly. Cool. Hopefully this is on the right side because I'm not sure exactly how this works. Here. Yeah, okay, we're going the right direction. I think I usually go about 6 out and 5 across, but we'll see how that does. So I'm watching this corner back here. You can hit G, Y. Okay, so that's fitting our screen. And then we want to move our background back along the x-axis until it's pretty well behind it. The reason for this is we don't actually want there to be cast shadow on that because that's going to be the sky. And it's better if the sky doesn't have shadows on it because that would look really, really weird. So this is looking okay. The only thing is we're getting these lines going back. There's a really easy fix for that. Like the reason it's doing that is just because we have generated out this plane. I'm going to make it go one more further back there. But you can add something to kind of randomize these waves. So you just go to a displace. So modifier, deform, displace. Already added one. Okay. And then you're going to add I did not mean to add an armature. Don't know why that's there. So displace, new texture. Then you're going to go to the texture here and select clouds. So that's going to add a random displacement to it. We want that to be a lot closer in. So I'm going to just change the size here to 5. Maybe even bigger. I don't know. 7. And that's just going to kind of displace it a little bit. I don't want it to be quite so strong. So if we go back to the modifier panel here, set the strength to 0. That's what it was. Just turn it up as much as will give a little offset so we aren't seeing those lines. So 0.3 might be good. I'll do 0.5, just be safe. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. You're not seeing those repetitive lines as much anymore. Even if we can see it from here, from far away, we're still going to see it, but from the camera view, yeah, I don't really notice it. So that's a good setup for our sea. We have the sky, although the sky should still probably be further back, but it's going to be good enough for now. Let's add the particle field. So I'm just going to add a mesh cube that we're going to use for the field. And then I'm going to scale that. along the X, the Y, the Z, and we want it to pretty much run the whole length of the ocean we've created. So put it around the middle. And then I'm going to scale down the front here. So I'm going to hit Tab to enter edit mode, select the edge, and move it down on the Z-axis, because you just don't need as many up high in front. And so to save our computer from generating things it's not going to use in the actual image, I'm hitting G, Z, and bringing it to about there. So I'm going to go back there, and I'm going to hit wireframe, so I can see where the top of that is. And looks like it could be a little wider in the back yet. So if I just select here that back plane and scale it along the y-axis, just so it just gets out of the frame. So that's where all of our particles are going to show up. And I'm going back to there. So we have that. We have our particle group. Now we just need to assign those particles in and set up the particle settings. So, particle settings. And we're getting some clipping back there. It's a real easy fix. If you just go to View and go to End Clipping, set it to 2000. And then we're actually going to want to move that pretty much to the extremity of that 2000. I'm going to hide this for just a second. Camera also has clipping, so that'll be here, and clipping 2000. There. Now we can see it and scale it up. Perfect. So let's bring back our cube. Is this our ocean? We never named our ocean. Man, what's wrong with me? Name the cube particle field. I don't know if I spelled that right. Particle box. Yeah, I don't know how to spell things. If I can find synonyms. Now I just need to learn how to spell synonym. Okay. All good. Let's go through these particle settings. This is the particle panel. It's kind of confusing because it doesn't really tell you anything that says it has to do with particles until you hit add. I don't know. That's something I would change. But once you hit add, you have way more information than you needed. So we went from having no information to way more information than we needed. We're actually going to set this up as hair rather than an emitter. And that's just so that it's static rather than moving. And for what we need, we don't, because we're only creating a still image, we don't need these moving around. It'll just be easier on the computer if they don't move. So we'll go with hair and emission source. We want to do it not from the face, but from the volume. So from the inside of the cube. And we only are going to want about 50. Want to not show the emitter in the render settings. And also to not show the emitter in the viewport display settings. So we don't want to see the giant box. We just want to see the particles themselves. And we don't want to see these pieces of hair. We want to see our hot air balloons. To put those hot air balloons in, we'll go to render, and where it says path, which is what's being displayed right now, we will go to collection and select our particles collection. They are incredibly small. It's very annoying. That's much better. And it looks like a decent size too. I'm actually going to try to match that size with these because I am going to bring some of these in. I'm going to go into the particles, and I'm going to take the red balloon and put it into the normal collection so that none of just the plain red balloon are in there, because that's going to be our main character, at least for my composition. You can do it as you wish. So I'd rather he not be in the main. Deselect the ocean and the particle box, and I'm going to scale these up to a size that I want, and then scale this down to like 0.5. Let's do... See, it would make sense to me if the scale 1 made it the size of the original particle that it was referencing, but for some reason it doesn't appear to be working that way. So 0.3 looks like about as close as we're going to get. And now I can scale them up just a tad more. And that looks fine. One thing I'd like to point out is that it looks like it just might have been a hurricane. Like, these guys are flying all over the place. And while you might want that for your picture because you think that's cool, I think it looks terrifying. Also cool, but terrifying, and not what I was going for. And since I'm in control, we're going to fix it. So to fix that, all you have to do, real simple, hit Advanced, Rotation, and we want them to, and then we're going to hit Global X. I don't know why it's Global X and not Global Z, because that would be the up and down axis, and that would make sense to me, but that's not how it wants to work. So it makes the demands. Well, it's kind of a mix of us making demands of the program and the program making demands of us, and it's a back and forth. We do have some underwater balloons right now. Let's fix that. Just pull that up a little bit. Let's see what's our camera seeing right now. Yeah, overall, looking pretty nice. Nice thing is, like, I don't like how this one's so close here. It's really easy with particle systems to just say, give me another random arrangement. So I could just go to emission and hit seed, and it'll give me another random arrangement. And another one, and another one. So I pick one I like, but before I do that, I want to get my red balloon in there so that I can think about the composition with the red guy in there as a whole. So we'll kind of put him here, kind of close to the water. Actually, let's move. You know, while we're looking at composition here, let's look at some camera settings, because currently the camera is 50 millimeters, which is fine, but I don't like to leave it on the default. I like to consider what I want to do, and I really want it to look kind of like it was taken through like a telephoto lens. So I want to go to like an 80 millimeter, and I'm going to hit that Shift Enye and fly back. And it's going to create a compressed view of what we're looking at. And I want these guys to move. Please? Yes. Select all of those balloons and move them out of my camera view. So let's get that placed nicely on a third. And Shift Enye to reposition my camera. I feel like we're starting to see some more patterns now that it's a little more compressed. So let's just go back here and increase the strength by 2. What happens if I go the whole way to 1? How's that gonna look? That's kind of nice. It's working. From here, we have our scene set up. I may play with composition a little bit more, but I won't make you sit around while I click random buttons and figure out how to make things look nice. So work on your composition. See if you can get it somewhere where you feel like it's going where you want it to go and you're ready to render, and then talk about render settings, add some depth of field, switch to cycles render, and talk about what all of that implies. So good luck with the rest of setting up your scene. So before we get crazy into render settings, I want to congratulate you on making it this far through the tutorial. You are almost done. So we're going to start this out with, I guess this isn't really render settings, but we do want to get the lighting set up in our scene, because if we go to render right now, it's really dark. So I'm just going to add a light. So we're going to add a sun. And so that was Shift A, light, sun. And notice how it added a bunch of suns everywhere, and now everything is crazy bright. We don't actually want that. We only want one sun. And the reason it went in there is because I had this collection selected. So if I just drag that to our main collection, that pulls it out. So we're going to rotate it just a little bit. And then rotate it on the Z-axis there. So that a good amount of the front there is being lit up by that sun lamp. Then it's a good idea to duplicate that, so that's Shift D and drag, and rotate that on the Z-axis to somewhere around there. And I'm going to make that light blue just a little bit to fill shadows, and this one warm. So we have a warm light and a cool light. Now that we have our lights in place, I think it's time to switch to cycles render, which is what we'll be finishing our render in. If you have CPU, if you have a graphics card that's really good, you should switch to that now. It'll probably be grayed out. So you will go up to your Edit, Preferences, System, CUDA. You're going to click that and then select your graphics card. Wow, that's some pretty intense Fresnel. So, okay. Let's go to the Materials tab quickly. I'm going to select the red balloon. Get that red. See how there's this really weird like halo? That's Fresnel. That's when you're looking at something from the side and it reflects more light. It's not supposed to do that. The reason it's doing that is because I have the roughness set to 8 instead of 0.8. It should only ever at the highest go to 1. So if I set that down, that's a little closer to a realistic rendering. It might not look great right now, but that part of that's because the lighting isn't finished. So let's go quickly. I'm going to cycle through my balloon materials, and because I messed that up on the very first one I did, I now have to fix it on every one I've made since. All right, that's a much more natural looking render. That's supposed to be red. Much better. So in the world panel, you can change the background color to, I would go somewhere around that, just so that it's kind of an ambient kind of surrounding. And then I would drop your strength to like 0.5. And that's probably going to be a good setting for that. I'm going to make this a little bit more extreme to help fill lighting right there. And the cool light should not be at a strength of 1. That should be at a strength of like 0.5. And the warm light should be at about a 1.5. That'll give you a good balance between the two. And now I think our lighting is getting very close to set. I'm going to push this a little warmer just because we're trying to get like a sunset feel in here. Not too much, but just enough. It's feeling sunsetty to me. All right. Thinking about rotating kind of this whole bit. There we go. Just want to. At this point, You're just kind of going in, making tiny tweaks, making it look slightly better and better. Once you're happy with your composition and your lighting, you can go to your camera and you have the option of adding depth of field. I'll select my balloon. This will only work with this balloon because it's a separate object. These are all one object, and so it will not work if you try to set this as your focus object, or it will focus somewhere randomly in the middle. So when we select the camera, we have depth of field here. Our depth of field is currently 2.8. That's practically nothing. So if you want to go for a rather extreme depth of field, around 0.07 will give you a nice look. And that kind of compresses things and makes it look small. So once you're happy with that, we can move on to the final render settings. So we already have switched to GPU compute if we had a good graphics card. If you had a good graphics card, your performance should be, you should go to performance tiles and set your tiles to 256. That has to do with the size of the render tiles when it's rendering. You'll see them, they're little boxes that outline little chunks that are being rendered. So big or good graphics card, 256. If you are rendering on CPU, your computer's core processor, then you should be rendering at 16. So it's faster when it handles smaller chunks for the CPU. GPU can handle bigger chunks. So 256 for me. Let's see, sampling. You can test what your computer needs. Whenever I use depth of field, I tend to get some weird patterns in this area. Like, see how it's kind of grainy now? We're going to use a denoiser that's going to help with that, but that can only do so much. So I would start with probably around 400 as your samples, just because we're using depth of field. With a denoiser, if it was without the depth of field, you could probably get away with 200 in the denoiser, but this should work fine for me. In this panel, you close out your passes and just check denoising. You can leave the default settings in here. So we're at 400, and I think that pretty much covers the settings. So if you hit render, so if you're happy with your final image, you can go to Image, Save As, name this Render 5. And if you are not happy with it, I recommend switching to the next slot and making your adjustments and re-rendering. Then you will have a render in this slot and a render in the first slot. So you can jump back and forth between them and see which one you like better. I'm pretty happy with the render that I have. I hope you guys are happy with the renders you guys got out of it. If you post them online, I'd love to see them. You can tag me in them on Instagram at man.in.motion. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed Blender 2.8. I certainly have. If you have any other thoughts on tutorials you'd like to see, feel free to drop a comment and let me know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe.